So we're on chapter 13 in the section 1 of your world history book, and we're going on to study England, or Britain at that time, and we're going to be talking about the first kings and how did Britain become a strong nation. So we got down and we're going into the history, and we come to this character, which would be called, basically, if you go back into English history, would be called the first king. His name was Alfred, and they called him Alfred the Great. He lived in 849 to 899. And he not only would be considered king of England, but even later on we'll find him king of the Danes, and we'll talk about the Danes. Well, who were the Danes? The Danish. They were like Viking-like people, and they were invading England. In 870, the Danes controlled England outside of Wessex, which means these Viking kings had control of most of what we call England right now then. But on the throne of Wessex and outside of Wessex, remember, the Danes controlled all of outside of Wessex, and Wessex actually considers Western England. They had a king, and his name was Alfred. And he was king at the age of 22, and he was an Anglo-Saxon king. But Alfred was different. Alfred was not barbaric. Alfred was wise and kind, and Alfred had become a Christian. And so Alfred read the Bible, and he looked on actually ruling as king as God would have him to rule through his word. So he ended up, Alfred, achieving victory over the Danes, and actually leading a lot of the Danes into Christianity at that time. Remember, the Danes were like Vikings. And the only area that was really then to consider Danish in England, and what we call to the northeast, and they called this the Danelaw, or where the Danish controlled their own nation. But the rest of England became a nation under Alfred. There's a statue of Alfred. King Alfred was considered the first king of England. And so because he had a national army, and he had even had foundations for his own navy, and he had this English code of law. The English code of law, guess what? It was based on the Bible's 10 Commandments. Because as I said, Alfred had read the Bible. And so he was going to base his leadership on the Bible, which is pretty amazing. It says here's a picture before, but this is before the King James, but before the Bible there. Pre-Reformation Bibles were mostly in Latin. So he wanted to make sure that it was in English. So he basically, being in Latin would cause the people on hearing they couldn't understand the scriptures. But King Alfred the Great did translate the Gospels into English or Anglo-Saxon so they could read them for themselves. And this was a foundation of Christianity. The common history and current events were given to common folk. So basically now, not only the Bible, but the common history was written down. And these were given just to common folk, along with the Bible. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle was there, was there for 100 of years, and put articles and communicated, and the people would start to learn how to read. Well, Alfred's home, where he was king, was in London. And London was just a small town, as we know then, and actually the Romans built the town way back when. But now Alfred made it his home. After Alfred dies, and we have 994 to 1035, we have another king coming. His name was Canute. And Canute is a strange name because it's Danish. It's actually Viking ordered. So he became king of England, and he also ruled not only England, but Denmark, Norway, and and the whole area of which would be considered considered into Ireland. You could see that. Well, anyway, the whole area there. And he was the son of King Sweyn Forkbeard. That's how they named their names. He looked like his beard looked like a fork, so they called him Sweyn Forkbeard. And he was a Viking. He basically Canute took over a battle of Assendun, where King Edmund Ironside was dying, and Canute came over and took over. We see a picture here, taking over the land of England. He was coronated, made king. That coronation means made king at Christmas. He was a very harsh ruler at first. But what happened to Canute? He became a Christian. And actually, he was the first Viking to do so, to become a Christian. And later on, as you see this time period, we have Christianity spreading to the Vikings. We even have the Vikings of Leif Erikson and Eric the Red that came to America during this time, and they both had come to know Christianity, and later both of them became Christians too. So we see how Christianity was being spread, and now we have even the king, the Danish king, becoming Christian. So he became the king back when. Let's go back to how he converted to Christianity, and then he married Ethelred's widow. Ethelred was the king, a king before him, and Ethelred had died, and so he married Ethelred's widow. Although he also had another wife. At that time, the Christianity was such a baby Christian, he didn't know you're only supposed to have one wife. So he had another wife. He became the king of Denmark in 1019 and the king of Norway in 1028. So he had a vast empire that not only included England, but all the surrounding areas. He divided the England into 4 parts to rule, so he could rule it efficiently and rule over each part, and send a ruler over each part, I should say. And he was also known for his careful treatment of the English. So not only as being Danish, he wanted to unite the English, or the Anglo-Saxons, in him in internal peace for England. He was surprisingly a popular king. And I think his popularity came in because he was a harsh Viking that came to the Lord, right? But he also increased the foreign trade. And after Canute's death, he had his son, I say a little illegitimate son. He wasn't married to the woman, which is kind of a weird thing. Like I said, he really had a weakness in that area. But Canute's, his son, Harold Harefoot, they call him Harefoot because he had like a rabbit's foot. He could run fast, I guess, claimed the power after Canute died. They also had, you can see these Vikings, they had kind of weird names, you know. So let's go on. Norman, okay, when you think of Norman, what do you think? I think of Normandy. And Normandy was in France. The Normans basically spoke French. And you will see, if you look on your map, you'll see that across from the English Channel and ever such, you'll see down how close France and England actually are. So Normandy was considered, they were considered Norman at the time, not necessarily French, but they spoke French. So the Saxon king, Edward, the Confessor, returned to the throne after Harold I and Hardy Canute's sons. They had died, and then we have the Saxon king Edward coming to the throne. Well, Edward, let's talk about this Anglo-Saxon king. Well, the thing about him is that he did not have any sons. I'm not sure if he had any daughters, but he surely didn't have an heir to the throne. So he probably didn't have any sons or daughters. And he used this to kind of claim and win power, because he'd say, okay, well, who's going to be the next king? Well, if you would do this thing, maybe I'll make you the next king. And if you'll be nice to me and give me this, maybe I'll make you the next king. Or maybe my cousin, or maybe, my distant relative. would become king. So he had everyone fighting, even while he was alive, on who was going to be king. This is really important because this comes into a huge battle just because he had already said, who's going to be heir? Well, you better be good to me or, you're not going to be heir, And so he had Harold II, his name was called Harold. His name was called Harold Goodwin. Poor Harold, horrible Harold, because he's really had a horrible time. Let's just say that. Well, Harold Goodwin was a relative of Canute's, and he claimed the throne. He stated that when Edward died on his deathbed, because Edward died, that Edward gave him the kingdom. And so everyone thought, oh, Harold's king, Harold's king. Well, Normandy, what happened? King Edward had gone down to Normandy, and he had met William, Duke of Normandy. And he was actually had been a vassal, or basically a knight of the King of France. And William claimed to be cousin to Edward, and Edward had already gave him the kingdom. And indeed, Edward went down there and told William that he could be the next king if he'd be good to him. And so what happened? We have two of his relatives wanting to become king, right? So we have which one? Well, the Pope at that time, let's see, the Pope at the time, which was very strong, and at the time the Pope was not was not necessarily a good Pope. Well, the Pope decided that he would stand behind William and say that William should be the next king. So all the Roman Catholics back then said, oh, and William too said, hey, the whole church is behind me. Okay. So William had some leverages because the Pope said that William should be king. So Harold previously had told William in Normandy he would not fight for the kingdom. So Harold and him had met before, and they said, well, let's not fight for the kingdom. And Harold thought, yeah, I'll let William be. But then Harold, after Edward died, Harold thought, I should be king. So this would lead into the famous Battle of Hastings in 1066. You have to know this. This is a history. So if you have a history test, it's going to say, the Battle of Hastings, when was it? 1066. The uncomfortable truth, because it was a battle between relatives wanting to be king, right? That's what we have. But the battle became a very harsh battle, but a short battle, but it would tell who actually would be. Would it be Edward, who was Anglo-Saxon, or would it be go back and be Norman? Norman were French. So would this give France a hold on the Anglo-Saxons and Danish of England? We'll see. What happened at the Battle of Hastings, which you should know here. We'll find out. The Battle of Hastings, October 14th, 1066. So you should remember that, 1066. One day, it was a day-long clash between the horror of Harold. I always think, poor Harold, because Harold would lose, and William's knights, and they fought this battle. Harold's brother Tausig was supposed to come, and Tausig was of a Danish. So we see the Danes were supposed to come in and help Harold fight, but they didn't show, and his brother didn't even show. So Harold's army was lacking, I should say. So Harold's short reign, making him the last Anglo-Saxon king. No more Anglo-Saxon kings after Harold. And now we have William becoming king. How did this happen? Well, during the battle, William pretended to flee, fled up to this mountain like he thought. And so Harold's army thought, oh, we got them up there, we got them up there. They're fleeing. And so here we have Harold's army coming to the mountain. And of course, William's army on the mountain shooting arrows. And guess what? Bingo! Harold got shot right in the head with an arrow and died. So now, who's going to be king? William, and they call him William the Conqueror because he would become king in London now. William the Conqueror. So the Battle of Hastings, one day, October 14th, 1066, William of Normandy, who spoke French, who was actually part of France at that time, would be taking over England and northern France. By this battle, changing no more Anglo-Saxon kings. Nope, not again, because William the Conqueror now took over the king in London. King William's reign. Here, look, a picture of him with a short hair, I guess. What did King William do? He was a strong king, very strong. He increased his power to become this strong ruler, and he made England very strong as a nation. He united them as a nation. You'd say feudalism was in full force because he was king and he controlled everything. He said England was his property, in fact, and he could give his property to whoever he wanted. And so his royal domain was huge, large. That means that his royal domain, where his palace was and everything, was humongous. And then he would give out these fiefs to his Norman knights. So, of course, we have Normandy, these Norman knights taking over England, the Anglo-Saxons, right? And he said all must swear allegiance to him. Although for Christianity, he never made everyone worship him as a god, but he said everyone should be in allegiance to him as he ruled. In 1068, 2 years after he took over the Battle of Hastings, he wrote this book called the Domesday Book. What do you think about that? They put together this Domesday Book. Basically, it told about everyone in the census. So he took a census to make sure who are all these people here. So they had to go and put the census to say who would be a citizen under William. And the reason he did this, bingo, you got it. He wanted them to pay taxes to him. So they would have to pay taxes to the king under William's reign. And many of them liked him, so because he was a strong king leader. And anyone who didn't like him, it was illegal for a lord to build a castle without his consent. So everyone was taxed and everyone was written in the Domesday Book. Now, I don't know why they called it the Domesday Book. That's a weird name, but it tells about all of England's heritage then and now in the book, and going into even into the census. Under William, he also divided the land into what was called shires. And these shires, each shire would have a reeve. And these reeve were the ministers, and the shires were the land. And so they were later called sheriffs. So shires, reeves. So sheriffs would run that area. And so William would appoint these sheriffs of the shires, and each sheriff would report to William so he could keep track of the people that way. He abolished the old witan and old noble assemblies and anything else that were before him, and he formed the great council of chief vassals to him. And this was under William, under his sheriffs. And here we have this whole area he controlled, along with Normandy and part of what is now France, this whole area. Wales was not controlled at that time, but these were the possessions of William I. William and the Pope. Well, the Pope had given William the blessing, remember? He stood behind William and not Harold. Horrible Harold, right? But anyway, he wasn't so horrible, but he was hopeless Harold. Let's just call him hopeless Harold. So anyway, William had the Pope's blessing. And he promised the Pope that the Church of England would be under the Pope at that time. But William was a very strong leader, and he made it clear that the Pope would not rule. And William would appoint all the church officials. Even the Archbishop would be appointed by William the Conqueror, because he did not want the Pope, did not want Catholicism coming in and controlling him. No church officials were allowed to report to the Pope anything, and the Pope couldn't send any officials to England unless William was approved by that, and no papal or Pope decrees without William's full consent. So basically, he said, "Okay, yes, you can support me, and I'll consider that we're part of the Roman Catholic Church and everything, but You're not going to control us in any way. You're not going to send people here. I'm going to appoint who I want to appoint, and you're not going to have control over my land, my kingdom, the kingdom of William. This Norman influence. So what happened? 1066 to 1154, when William became king, it influenced the language. Why? Because William and the Normans, or people in Normandy, spoke French. So the words were combined from French words were combined with the English words. And so now French was the official language of England. And that the Normans occupied all positions of power. So people had to learn how to speak French. And being Anglo-Saxon, they spoke English. So throughout this culture, France and England, both of their language kind of became, combined, and even into the English words. A lot of English words today have a French background. William's son Henry. William's son Henry, William died. So who was going to become? He has his son Henry I. Henry I was pretty fair and had a lot of wisdom. So he's Henry he's trying to rule righteously. In fact, they call him the Lion of Justice because he was really into justice. And he ruled 1100 to 1135. And he wanted to end the heavy taxation of the nobles. And he put together the nobles and the church into the Charter of Liberties. So Charter of Freedoms, to try to unite the church and the nobles so that they would be in agreement. Exchequer was a group of nobles or administrators that looked after the finances and acted as judges in areas of the revenue here. So we called them exchequer. That's one of your rule. An exchequer basically checked the finances to make sure the nobles were paying their taxes and making sure the church too that they were in line and not out of line when it came into finances. Henry II, after Henry I, would change the name into the Plantagenet, the Plantagenet kings. The Plantagenet kings you're going to know, because from the Plantagenet kings will even come into modern kingdoms. So why did he change his name, Henry II? Well, we'll find that out in our next video.